So good afternoon. My name is Dr. Teresa Emmerich Camper and I work with the University of Exeter in the UK. Though my specialty area is prehistoric skin tanning technologies, I occasionally get the opportunity to work on projects which veer somewhat from my admittedly niche specialization. This happened in the autumn of 2019 when I was asked to construct a large amount of equipment and participate in a reality documentary for UK Channel 4. The program wanted to focus on how early peoples moving into the European subcontinent could have interacted with new and potentially unfamiliar environments during their migrations. The following research made up a small portion of this journey. As illustrated here, the vast majority of items used by early peoples were constructed from organic materials. These perishable materials rarely survive intact, if at all, leaving archaeologists to grapple with how to fill this enormous blank space in our information about how people interacted with their environments and how they innovated and adapted to the changing natural and social landscapes around them. Experimental archaeology provides one avenue for investigating these sorts of issues. Constructing artifacts within an experimental framework has the potential to provide unique insight into processes undertaken in the past. Processes which are often impossible to directly observe in the archaeological record. This presentation highlights this potential using a case study outlining the construction, use, and analysis of a set of water containers made from cow bladders. It is difficult to root this research directly into the archaeology, as internal organs are delicate and therefore less likely to survive intact from early time periods. There are, to the best of my knowledge, no archaeological finds of bladder containers. Now, this is not to say that we will never find one. A beautifully preserved example of a stomach, which was used as the liner for a cheese bag, was excavated from the Pasrak II grave mounds dating to the Scythian Iron Age, proving that these types of items can, in exceptional circumstances, survive interment. However, while the archaeological evidence for the use of bladders is scarce, their use as containers is well documented ethnographically. They were used as the traditional liners for leather bota bags in Europe prior to plastic, as water containers and storage pouches for porcupine quills in many areas of North America, and as water bags, grease containers, fishing floats, and harpoon floats throughout the circumpolar regions. Due to public domain issues, this slide contains a list of links as opposed to photos to a number of ethnographic examples. Instead of direct evidence, which is unlikely to survive, this investigation is instead based on resource availability and suitable functionality. The use of bladder containers offers one potential solution for storing water whilst in camp and carrying water between camps when necessary. The materials needed would have been readily available for the time period and would functionally fulfill the requirements for carrying liquid in a pre-pottery context. They are lightweight, compressible, non-breakable, and unlike waterproof basketry, can be produced with a minimum of time investment. The osteological record tells us that large game animals were being hunted throughout early human history, making bladders a commonly available resource, and an organ designed to hold liquid would not have gone unnoticed. This would have been readily recognized as a useful function by nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples. As mentioned previously, the water bladders were constructed for use in a reality documentary series looking at living strategies used by early peoples migrating into the European subcontinent. Due to the nature of producing a television program, the experimental protocol was not as stringently applied as it could have been in a more controlled setting. This project is therefore considered investigative in nature. This research sought to answer the following questions. 1. When made by an experienced tanner and craftsperson, what was the approximate length of time needed to produce containers using 2 different preparation methods and 3 different tanning or processing methods? 2. How well did the different containers using this variety of methods actually function? 3. How long a use life did each container have until it either no longer held water effectively or until the water was no longer drinkable? And 4. Were there notable differences in the degradation between the different containers when used for approximately the same number of use hours? The experimental set of containers was comprised of 10 bladders, all of which were rehydrated, then washed well with warm water and liquid dish soap, as the origin of the bladders and their cleanliness was unknown at the time. The bladders then underwent 2 variations of pre-processing. They were either full thickness or the thickness was split down by peeling off the outer tissue layer. One each of split and full thickness bladders were then tanned using two contrasting tannage technologies, fat tan and vegetable tan. A single full thickness container was made from simple washed rawhide and was used as a control. After completing the various tannage processes, each bladder was rubbed down with rendered deer fat, adipose tissue, to help the tissue remain flexible and less likely to tear after repeated wet and dry cycles. The fat also helped to slow the seepage of water through any thin areas, such as around the urethral exit and where the ureters enter the bladder. Spouts were then made from elder stems, which are less difficult to hollow out using non-metal tools than a more solid wood species. The spouts allowed water to be drunk more easily and the containers to be sealed more thoroughly for traveling, using a simple wooden plug to seal the top of the spout. Two parallel grooves were braided around the circumference of the spouts, approximately 2 to 3 centimeters apart. The bladder opening was trimmed evenly, then wrapped around the outside of the spout. A small length of string was then lashed tightly around the spout, trapping the bladder between the string and the wood. The groove allowed the string to compress the bladder more tightly around the spout, effectively sealing this area. This chart records the time needed to go from a raw, dry bladder to a finished container, using only stone tools for cutting, hollowing, and scraping the elderberry wood spouts, and for hand twisting the small lengths of nettle string needed to lash the bladder to the spouts. Now, only one container was made this way as a time trial. When using modern tools for the remaining 9 containers, the manufacturing time, designated by MF in the chart, was approximately 30 minutes less per container. The bladders on their own were not robust enough to be used as a standalone container, as water is quite heavy. Each participant constructed a carrying sling for their bladder. Of the 8 participants, 2 made bags from leather and 6 made fiber nets to place the bladder inside. These containers supported the bladders when full of water and allowed a carrying strap to be attached to the net or bag. The containers were then continuously used for 4 weeks by a group of 8 outdoor skills specialists, traveling through the Rhodope Mountains of Bulgaria as part of the documentary. The containers were used to both store water in camp and to transport water between camps, and each container was monitored daily during their use. The containers were filled mainly from streams, and they were easier to fill from fast-running water than in a pool of still water, just due to the small size of the spout. After a week of use, the vegetable-tanned and fat-tanned bladders all seeped small amounts through the thickness of the bladder walls. Each of the bladders were allowed to dry until just damp, and were then recoated with a mixture of rendered deer fat and a small percentage of beeswax to help mitigate this issue. This stopped most dripping, but the bladders were all damp to the touch when in use. Insects were more attracted to the fat-tanned bladders than to either the rawhide or vegetable-tanned bladders. The participants drank water from their bladder containers most days during the project. The feedback on both taste and scent has been consolidated into the following graph by week. As the weeks go on, the fat-tanned and rawhide bladders begin to break down due to both bacterial and fungal activity, and scent and taste change accordingly. The vegetable-tanned bladders do not change as much. The fat-tanned bladders were the first to show signs of deterioration in the form of black mold spots at day 17. The rawhide bladder followed next and showed mold spots as well by day 21. The vegetable-tanned bladders, as expected, did not develop black mold at all. Fat-tanned bladder number 8 was rendered unusable by insect chewing on day 22. And all 3 tannage types developed white mold during transport from Bulgaria back to the United Kingdom. This is believed to be due to insufficient drying time before leaving. At the end of 4 weeks, the containers were observed both macroscopically and microscopically to assess the level of deterioration. The main observable change in the bladder tissue was the gradual growth of 3 kinds of mold: black, red, and white. Black and red mold grew inside the bladder tissue on both the fat-tan and rawhide containers. After drying, the red mold disappeared, and so is not featured in the assessment photographs. It was no longer observable either macro or microscopically. The white mold, however, was a surface growth. It appeared during the transport period between leaving the Rhodope Mountains and returning to the UK, over a period of 3 days. Unlike the black and red mold, it formed only on the surface and not within the bladder tissue itself. In addition to the growth of black and red mold, the fat tanned bladders were also more attractive to insects than the vegetable tanned or rawhide versions. The insect damage which made one bladder unusable is pictured at the bottom center. Unlike the dermal tissue of skin, bladder tissue does not have a distinct upright fiber structure. Deterioration of its fiber structure was therefore not able to be observed, as no fiber structure was visible in either the fat tanned or rawhide containers, and was only visible in a few select areas in the vegetable tanned bladders. The vegetable tanned bladders did not suffer from black or red mold growth. This was expected, as vegetable tan is much more impervious to deterioration when in a wet state than either fat tan or rawhide. However, it is unlikely that this tannage technology was actually in use during early periods, as it takes much longer to produce and requires a large container in which to hold the tanning liquids in order to produce fully tanned items. While there are many ways to produce short-soak vegetable tans that can be done with period-appropriate technology, to date no direct evidence exists for this tanning method prior to approximately 4,000 years before present. White mold also formed on the surface of the vegetable tanned bladders during the transport period. As was the case with the other two tannage types, this mold was a surface growth and did not form within the bladder tissue as happened with the black and red molds. As is often the case with television production, unfortunately, the science gets a bit lost, as the network's focus on what aspects of the UK version of the programme it chose to highlight shifted somewhat in the post-production process. Nonetheless, the Arte version, which will air in France and Germany in the near future, makes the science more of a feature. However, the main goal of this project, which I believe was achieved, was to provide insight into the sparsely researched subject of how pre-pottery societies could have stored and carried water. Additionally, it provided an unusual avenue for bringing experimental archaeology to a wider audience through a commercial media venture. As demonstrated here, reconstruction rooted in functionality can be a viable research pathway for gaining insight into potential material use in early time periods. So, how is this useful? The information gained on the material properties, functional attributes, and deterioration patterns can be consolidated and used to design future experimental projects with more stringent controls, or could potentially be used to inform future finds suspected of being constructed from under-researched material types, such as those highlighted here, like internal organs. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any queries in the question and answer session at the end of this set of presentations. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.